principally from the defendant's corporate representative. I've taken some notes, and I thought it was important to give you all some context as you examine the court transcripts and develop your stories for tonight and tomorrow. We believe it's clear from the testimony that's been presented to Judge Bachman that at the height of the opioid epidemic, 2009 to 2011, J&J targeted over 140,000 Oklahoma doctors with sales contacts. We also believe that the transcripts are clear with regard to J&J sales reps presenting themselves as pain experts, although typically they had no training in addiction science or the practice of medicine. Instead, under the corporate euphemism of education, they clearly influenced, targeted, hooked, and leveraged doctors into buying their opioids. It's also clear, based on the evidence that we believe the judge has heard, that sales reps were paid based on the number of prescriptions written. And they did that with the aid of a blizzard of leave-behinds, lunches, donuts, and don't worry about addiction winks and nods. It's also clear, we believe, based on the transcript, that the defendants used data mining to target and influence doctors who were high-frequency prescribers in the state. We think the transcript is clear that the defendants ignored internal scientific advice from advisors about comparing the addiction risks of their products, their opioid products, with other companies' products. We also think it's clear that they ignored advice from their internal scientists with regard to using data to sell their pharmaceuticals, even though it was clear that the studies and data that they were using weren't based on reliable science and research. I also want to point you to the testimony around the marketing campaign that the defendants rolled out over a spring break, in which they promoted their opioid products for strains and sprains. Minor injuries that in the annals of medicine have not been the focus of opioid analgesics. And perhaps most important, there's been no effort on the part of the defendants to refute what we think is as important a factor in this case as anything. They own two subsidiaries, wholly owned. They grew poppies, opium, down under, and these two entities, Noramco and Tasmanian Alkaloids, supplied over half of the active pharmaceutical ingredients in hydrocodone and oxycodone for most of the industry. So these are some points that I wanted to share with you as we've been in trial for a few days. Again, I encourage you to relate what I've told you to what's in the transcript, and I'm happy to answer a few questions at this point.
Just curious, you've heard them paint a very different picture today of how they marketed their opioids very responsibly, they claim, and following all of the FDA required regulations.
Well, we've seen a lot of references to paperwork, very detailed paperwork, most of it in fine print. We think what's important, Alex, was the activities of the sales reps when they interacted with the doctors. So what's in print and what's being described here is one thing, what actually happened is another, and we think that's the most important part of our evidence.
Safe to say that the state is very confident still in their case.
Supremely confident. Yeah, thanks, Leela. Anybody else?
Could you clarify that first number that you gave? Did you say 180,000 physicians?
It's, I think, north of 140,000 doctors during 2009, 2011 in Oklahoma.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not the number of sales calls, the number of physicians?
Number of sales calls to physicians.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, anybody else?
Well, I'm curious what you think the state could do to better monitor opioids, prescription opioids in Oklahoma. I mean, do you think the state is doing everything it can?
Well, in recent years, based on policy changes, we have, I think, now one of the strongest physician monitoring programs, patient monitoring programs, so that we know between doctors when patients are doctor shopping. We now have limits on how doctors can prescribe, the number of pills they can prescribe with respect to acute and chronic pain. So where we are is we've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go with respect to the years ahead of us to abate the epidemic.
You heard they spent a considerable amount of time talking about the continuing medical education and their efforts to educate doctors, which seems to go to their point that ultimately they're not the ones responsible. They couldn't directly put opioids in the hands of Oklahomans.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, how these drugs were dispersed is a big part of our case. I think we put on a lot of testimony. We're going to put on a lot more. You know, and it's all about actions, not words. Doctors had the, I think, right to, and they had the experience of being able to rely on representations that were made to them with respect to addictive qualities of prescription drugs that were being sold to them. So again, actions speak louder than words. Anybody else?
We're gonna have to get him out of here.
Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for staying around. Thanks.